So we started this day tour at the Yap Sandiego Ancestral House. Nearby is the heritage of Cebu Monument. We'll then move south to Fort San Pedro, which is situated in Plaza Independencia. And finally move west to visit Magellan's Cross and Santo Nino Basilica. Chinese merchants are believed to have built this historic residential home in 1675. Locals believe it's one of the oldest existing residential structures in the country. It was at this house that the rich and prominent Filipino Chinese lived during the Spanish times. Today, the 3-century-old house serves as a museum. This ancestral house was owned by a Chinese trader, John Juan Yap, and his wife, Donna Maria Florida, who had 3 children. Their oldest daughter, Maria, later married Don Mariano Sandiego, who was the chief of pavilion during the Spanish colonial period. The most recent owner is the famous choreographer and antique collector Val Sandiego, the great-great-grandson of Maria. These wooden parts of the house were made from malave, which is one of the hardest woods in the Philippines. A steep staircase leads you up to the 2nd floor. Here you will find lots of religious images, antique furniture, kitchenware, glassware, paintings and decorative art passed on through 8 generations of the family. Images of the Santo Nino and Virgin Mary stand in one corner, and angel sculptures accentuate the wooden ceiling and doors. I walked around the room a couple of times, so forgive me if you've seen the same thing twice. The majority of objects and artifacts on view are pretty boring really, but there were some things that were quite weird that caught my eye, which I'd like to go back to. I particularly loved this wall here with these little cherubs hanging down. They were quite bizarre. I also loved the old photographs and paintings that were on display. These dolls in glass boxes were also quite weird. This house was once used as a boarding house for students, as it is close to colleges and universities. The students occupied several rooms on the 2nd floor, which were later restored to their original state. Several of Cebu's elites wanted to buy this property, but Mr. Santiago promised not to sell it in his lifetime as a tribute to his forefathers. I also love huge religious statues, especially when placed out of context outside a church. Seeing vintage telephones and radios is also fascinating. This photograph of a nun cut out from the background is also amusing. I wonder what she was standing in front of. I take back what I said earlier about the things on display being quite bland. There's actually quite a lot of interesting objects on display. But I do wonder what their thought process was behind the objects on display, because a lot of it is quite random. To wrap up their tour, each tour group stands in front of the window to have a staged photograph taken. These sort of situations always amuse me, where the kids are playing dress up, wearing traditional clothing. Sort of thing you find in Thailand, where you're taken to an authentic village, where locals are dressed in costumes for the day, and then at the end of the day they change into their jeans and t-shirt. As soon as the tourists are out of the way, the young boy's back on his phone. I'm not a big fan of tourist sites per se. I'd rather just walk around the streets and soak up the culture. No more than 100 metres away, you'll come across the heritage of Cebu Monument. It was built right on the original Plaza Pavilion in Cebu City. Construction of the structure began in July 1997, and its inauguration was on December the 8th, 2000, 3 years later. Conceptualised by multi-awarded sculptor Eduardo Castrillo, the mammoth structure depicts significant moments in Cebu's history, beginning with that fateful fight of April 27th, 1521, on the island of Mactan, where native chieftain Lapu Lapu killed Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan. The monument also portrays the conversion of Raja Humabon and his followers to Christianity, local revolution against Spanish rule, Cebuano veneration of Santo Nino, and beautification of first Cebuano Saint Pedro Calungusid. Don't miss out on quality broadcasting. Please like and subscribe to Bigg World Cinema. Thank you. We continue our tour of downtown historical Cebu to Plaza Independencia, which is 2 blocks east of Plaza Sugbo. The statue you're seeing here was erected to commemorate Ramon Magsaysay, who was elected as the country's 7th president in November 1953. Magsaysay became active in fighting against the expansion of communism in the Asian region. He made the Philippines a member of the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. Magsaysay's active coordination with the Japanese government led to the reparation agreement between the Philippines and Japan, obligating the Japanese government to pay $550 million for war damages in the Philippines. But on 17th of March 1957, President Magsaysay, often referred to as the champion of the Filipino masses, died at the age of 59 when his presidential plane tragically crashed on Mount Mananggul, just north of Cebu City. Plaza Independencia is the oldest and largest civic space in Cebu City. Various names have been used throughout its history. In the 17th century it was known as the Plaza des Armas. When it was widened later on and expanded to reach nearby properties of the Cathedral of Cebu, it was called Plaza Maya. In the latter part of the Spanish colonial era in the Philippines, the civic space was further landscaped and developed. It was referred to as the Plaza Maria Cristina, in honour of Queen Maria Cristina of the Two Sicilies. Sometime during the American colonial period of the first half of the 20th century, the square was known as the Plaza Libertad. The plaza's current name was adopted sometime prior to the start of World War II. Today, the plaza is a popular hangout for many living or working around the area. I find it weird how people pose in front of statues they know nothing about. I'm sure if you asked these young girls who the obelisk was dedicated to and you said Miguel López de Legazpi, the first Spanish Governor General of the Philippines, they wouldn't have a clue who you're talking about. What I love about the Philippines is how friendly Filipinos are. You can barely travel more than a few yards before somebody says, "Hi, how are you? Where are you from? Welcome to the Philippines." Philippines have a general interest in you which you won't find in other Asian countries. It's great that the majority of people speak English. Here you can have a conversation with the cashier in the supermarket. You simply can't do that in Thailand, unless you speak Thai. One thing that Cebu lacks is parks and greenery and places to hang out. So it was such a shame during lockdown when this place was closed. It has only recently been opened. It covers 4 hectares, one huge garden with acacia trees, ornamental plants and flowers. I visited the plaza on a Sunday, so it was quite popular. You'll also find it busy early evening when many people come here to hang out. Carry on, do your little TikTok thing. Go on, do it. So we've been following the perimeter wall of the fort of San Pedro, a military defence structure built by the Spanish under the command of Miguel López de Legazpi, who was the first governor of the Captaincy General of the Philippines. Legazpi's original fort, dating from 1565, was made of wood. In the early 17th century, a stone fort was built to repel Muslim raiders. Today's structure dates from 1738 and is the oldest triangular bastion fort in the country, serving as the nucleus of the first Spanish settlement in the Philippines. The victory of the Americans at the Battle of Manila Bay on May 1, 1898 marked the end of the Spanish era in the Philippine Islands. At this time, the fort was also attacked and surrendered by the Spaniards to the Cebuano revolutionaries during the Philippine Revolution. Fort San Pedro became part of the American Warwick Barracks during the American regime. From 1937 to 1941, the barracks were converted into a school where many Cebuanos received their formal education. During World War II, from 1942 to 1945, Japanese residents of the city took refuge within the walls. When the battle to liberate the city of Cebu from the Imperial Japanese forces was fought, the fort served as an emergency hospital for the wounded. From 1946 to 1950s, Fort San Pedro was an army camp. And after 1950, the Cebu Garden Club took over and fixed the inner part and converted it into a miniature garden. In 1957, Mayor Sergio Osmeña Jr. announced he wanted to demolish Fort San Pedro and erect a new city hall. This started a movement against the demolition idea, and when confronted by civic leaders and society heads, Osmeña caved in and said he will use instead the space behind the fort. In the same year, the City Council commissioned a religious sect named the Lamplighter to manage a zoo subsidised by the city within the fort courtyard. By 1968, the facade, quarters and walls of the original structures of Fort San Pedro were so obliterated that only the 2 towers were recognisable. Plans for the restoration of the fort were started and the zoo was relocated. Restoration of Fort San Pedro was a tedious, time and labour-consuming project. To restore the fort as close to the original as possible, coral stones which were hauled from under the sea along Cebu coastal towns were utilised. Delivered crudely cut to the restoration site, the fort labourers did the final cutting and polishing to make the blocks fit each other. The project took a while, but by the 1970s both Fort San Pedro and Plaza Independencia were consolidated into a major tourist attraction for the city. I've mentioned before that I'm not a great fan of tourist sites per se, but actually it's quite a lovely place to come to and while away an afternoon. There's space here, it's quiet, it's empty, there's not many people come to visit. So you could come with your book and sit and read for a couple of hours. For 30 pesos? Why not? The fort is open from 8 AM till 5 PM, Monday to Sunday. So continuing our tour of historical Cebu, we're heading to Plaza Sugbo, where Magellan's Cross Pavilion is located. This pavilion houses Magellan's cross, which is the original wooden cross planted by explorers of the Spanish expedition of the first circumnavigation of the world led by Ferdinand Magellan upon arriving in Cebu in the Philippines on April the 21st, 1521. The pavilion itself, which houses the Tindalo cross, was built sometime in the 1800s. The structure is octagonal, made of coral stone. The original cross was encased inside another wooden cross made of Tindalo wood in 1835. This was to protect the original cross from people who chipped away parts of it, believing that the cross possessed miraculous powers. Some people, however, believe that the original cross has been destroyed. It always amuses me how tourists want to stand and have their photographs taken in front of these objects. What are they going to do with the photographs? Are they just going to remain on their phones? Are they going to do anything with them? Are they going to print them off? In the olden days, my father would shoot images on transparency film and then have slideshows where the images were projected onto a screen. People don't do that anymore, so what do they do with their images? I guess that they show them to grandma or post them on their numerous Facebook accounts. Why do Filipinos have different Facebook accounts? Well, I guess that topic for a different day. The mural on the ceiling depicts the baptism of Raj Humabon and his household by Father Pedro Valderrama and the planting of a wooden cross by Ferdinand Magellan. Just a few metres away is the entrance to Basilica del Santo Nino, the oldest Roman Catholic church in the country.
To everyone entering the Basilica compound, please be reminded to wear your face masks properly, check your body temperature upon entry, and observe physical distancing. Kindly remove your hats and caps, and do not leave your personal belongings unattended. This is for everyone's safety and security. Thank you.
It was founded in 1565 by Fray André de Adanate and Fray Diego de Herrera, allegedly built on the spot where the image of the Santo Nino de Cuba was found during the expedition of Miguel López de Legazpi. The first church to be built on this site was burned down in November the 1st, 1566. The construction of a new church started in 1605 and was finished in 1626. But in March 1628, this church also burnt down. It wasn't until 1735 that the foundations of the present church were started using stone. The church was eventually finished around 1739. Over the next 200 years, renovations of the church took place. The original features of the church have been retained except for the windows, which were added by Fray Mateo Diaz. When Pope John Paul VI made the Church of Basilica in 1965, he declared it to be the symbol of the birth and growth of Christianity in the Philippines. On October 15th, 2013, a 7.2 magnitude earthquake shook Tagbilaran on Bohol, but its force was felt throughout the Visayas. The earthquake caused more than 120 casualties and much damage to buildings, historical landmarks and churches. The earthquake destroyed most of the basilica's belfry and facade. Some walls and frescoes were cracked. The restoration of the basilica was one of the 16 projects facilitated by NHCP in Cebu province in 2015. The bell tower is now fully reconstructed, and the main door of the church, as well as the area in between the original church and the Pilgrim Centre, is now fully accessible. To accommodate the growing number of devotees who could easily fill the basilica, a Pilgrim Centre was built within the church compound, which you can see opposite here. Holy Mass is celebrated here on Fridays, and religious festivities are also held here in the open-air theatre-like structure. It was completed in September 1990 and can accommodate 3,500 people. If you liked the video, please could you like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video.